Welcome back, everybody. I'm actually British and German. I've got both passports. I'm a citizen of both countries. And I'm having great fun here talking about economics because the first economist I told you about was British, he was Scottish. The second one was a great German. And now we've got another great Brit. So I'm kind of celebrating very clever people coming from the two countries I know best. Isn't it nice? I've got a good reason to be patriotic. Some great thinkers. So there you are, back to Britain for part 3 of our historical overview of economics. Our question this time, how hands-on should our governments be? If we have times of economic difficulty, if we have times of economic recession, how interventionist should the state be? And I'm going to be answering this question with some thoughts from this particular person here, John Maynard Keynes. His name is a bit hard to pronounce, actually, Keynes, because it's spelt a little bit like key, isn't it? But you don't say it like key, you say Keynes. Sorry about that. Annoying English names. Who was he? He was an economist and a mathematician. His life was utterly fascinating. If you have even the slightest of interest, I can really recommend popping his name into a search machine or checking out the Wikipedia page. A really unusual guy. He was surrounded by intellectual friends, a big figure in intellectual circles in that interwar period. He really is acknowledged as one of the most important Brits of the 20th century. He's one of the greats, up there with Winston Churchill and David Bowie. His importance was much better appreciated after his death, quite literally immediately after his death. It's quite bitter that he never saw his theories be applied so consistently. So his ideas were celebrated shortly after his death. In that period, the post-World War II period, his economic theory became established throughout Western economies. Britain, Germany, America, we were all using his theories to the dot. We were following his advice with utter seriousness. So his ideas became mainstream, but only after his death. And there's a famous truism, a funny phrase really. Keynes himself was quite ambivalent about capitalism. He saw it as being quite unstable and self-destructive. And the joke is he actually managed to save capitalism. So he saved capitalism from itself. Keynes saved capitalism from the capitalists. What's the starting point? Let's think about the business cycle. And I've got a picture here of a wavy line, The business cycle, periods of economic boom, the economy is getting stronger. Periods of economic boom, they seem inevitably followed by periods of economic recession. Okay, so the economy grows and grows and grows, but then it collapses and it contracts and contracts and contracts. It gets smaller and smaller and smaller. This is the problem. We would like to have a gently stable and growing economy, but that's not what we're getting. We're getting this economic cycle. It's always changing. Of course, recessions are painful times. They're painful for workers. You've got unemployment, poverty rises. Recessions are a horrible thing, which we must do anything we can to prevent. Keynes had a theory on the causes of recessions. He was interested in this topic and he had instincts as to where they were coming from. Now, the background is a private interest, actually a private vice, if you like. Keynes was a naughty boy. He liked to gamble. He liked to play with his money on the stock market. So Keynes was buying stocks and shares in companies, buying them, hoping that their value would rise, hoping to sell them again and make a bit of a quick profit. Okay, so he was playing on the stock market. In doing so, he became fascinated by the unpredictability of economic trends. Economics is unpredictable, he noted, because stock prices reflect individual, irrational human behavior. Stock prices do not move rationally, they move following the people who are buying and selling them, following their irrational instincts. He examined herd mentality. A herd is like a group of animals. Think of, say, a flock of sheep running because they're scared of something, or buffalo, bison running away again because they're alarmed at something. So he was interested in herd mentality. These investors were not rational, calculating people, but rather they were following their animal instincts, their animal spirits, as Keynes formulated it. Good, good. If I want to explain Keynes' ideas, maybe it's nice to contrast his ideas with how people thought about it before him. And before he was using his ideas to create new solutions, we had classical economics approaches to ending recessions. Now, it's worth noting in classical economics, recessions are self-correcting. Recessions are self-correcting. Why? In a recession, unemployment rises. People lose their jobs. So you're going to have more and more unemployed workers. Now, the people who don't lose their jobs, they're going to be forced to take wage cuts because their employer will say to them, look, guys, pay attention. These unemployed people, they want your job. They're willing to work cheap. So you have to work a bit cheaper as well. So wages drop in periods of high unemployment, because others are willing to work for less. Now, sooner or later, it becomes attractive and profitable for businesses to start investing again. So our frightened investors, after a while, they're going to see the wages dropping so much, they're thinking, hey, we can make a quick buck here. So sooner or later, the investor is going to be tempted once again to invest the money. And of course, investment can also be encouraged by having low interest rates. The interest rate is the cost of borrowing money. If you go to the bank and say, I want to buy a car, they might throw you some money, okay? You take it, you buy your car, and you have to pay them back that money, plus a little bit extra. A little bit extra. This extra bit is the interest rate bit, okay? It's a percentage of the amount per annum. Okay, and if interest rates are low, and they will be in a period of recession, if the banks have low interest rates, that also encourages investment. Don't leave your money in the bank, but rather, dear investor, invest it in economic production. So following the logic of the thinkers before Keynes, in a recession, you don't really have to do anything. Just hang on in there, wait, be patient, okay? Nobody has to do anything to correct recessions in classical economics. So very much a picture of self-stabilising systems. There is a problem though. Although classical economics says recovery is going to happen sooner or later, it doesn't really say when. You know, when will it kick in? Nobody really knows. We might have to wait and wait and wait, of course, and suffer and suffer and suffer. So this is serious stuff. This is a severe weakness in this classical economics perspective. The reassuring point is, if we wait long enough, if we are patient, recovery will come by itself. And again, to stress, these thinkers were seeing economies as being self-stabilizing systems. Keynes, he wasn't buying any of that. He was seeing it in quite a different way. He argued deep recessions could persist indefinitely. You know, yes, you're waiting for that recovery to come. You see it's around the corner. He would say, I don't necessarily. He saw the possibility of having very long, prolonged, deep and painful recessions. They could go on and nobody could really say when they would get better. Maybe the recovery never arrives, certainly not in the near future. Possible reasons for this, you know, without being pessimistic here, we have a number of reasons to believe that recessions can be very, very long. In an economic recession, people stop buying. All those goods that you've already produced, they're in your warehouse. And obviously it makes sense for you to sell them before you start spending more money on producing new things. Okay, so another reason to have even less production, in which case you have workers with even less money. And again, you can see this vicious circle, can't you? Again, these animal spirits I mentioned a moment ago, this herd mentality. Investors here are not necessarily being rational. They could be irrationally scared. That's quite plausible, isn't it? And again, that's going to dampen investment. And as I've said, unemployed people buying fewer goods, that makes less demand. That reduces the profitability of any new investment. You've got a real vicious circle here. This is going from bad to worse. So that's Keynes' analysis of the situation. What's his remedy? This is the really exciting bit. He proposed something which was utterly counterintuitive. This is not what you would intuitively expect him to suggest. In a time of recession, governments should spend more. Governments should spend more in a time of recession. We call this demand management in economic jargon. Forget about the government for a minute. Think about your own private income. Fantasy. You've got a year which is a good year. You're working hard and you're earning a lot of money. What do? You spend more, don't you? That's your natural instincts. You treat yourself to an especially nice summer holiday and an especially nice winter holiday. You buy a few nice new things for yourself, some new clothes, maybe even a new car. That's what we do when the going is good. And the opposite is also the case. If your employer says, look, I'm sorry, I don't need so many hours of work from you. I'm going to have to give you reduced working hours. You're foreseeing your income reducing. And to be honest, you tighten your belt. It's like with your trousers, isn't it? You know, you're going to be living more economically. You're going to be living cheaper, treating yourself to expensive food less. You know, maybe that holiday should be a cheaper holiday rather than an expensive one on the other side of the world. So what we do as a private household is to spend more money when we have more money and spend less money when we don't, okay? And broadly speaking, governments may find themselves doing this. This is the kind of thing that governments do. When they don't have much money, their tendency may be to save. But Keynes is suggesting they do the exact opposite. In a recession, that time when actually you can't spend more, the government should nonetheless spend more. If the government spends more in a recession, more than its falling tax revenue generates. In a recession, people are paying less tax because people are losing their jobs. So if the government has less money, okay, it wants to spend less. Keynes is saying, no, it should spend even more. So increasing its spending at a time when its income is decreasing. Again, counterintuitive, but Keynes is saying this is what governments should do. Obviously, if it's going to spend money it doesn't have, it's going to have to borrow to do this. It goes without saying the borrowed money can be repaid at the next opportunity in the next economic boom period. Spending can be on public works. You know, the government should build schools or improve schools. It should build roads, bridges, that kind of thing. Okay, public works. Why? What's the logic here? The government spending encourages private spending. Let's take our road building example. The government has decided to build a new road. We needed that road. The business people said, oh, please, let's build a road to that town. It will help the infrastructure. It will help business. Okay, we needed the road anyway. We're going to borrow the money to pay for this road. So you've got a whole bunch of workers digging, putting down the tarmac, flattening it all up, okay? The government has to pay these guys. When they get paid on Friday, they go to the bakery, get some nice bread, go to the butcher's, get some nice meat, go to the pub, have a drink, okay? The local baker, butcher, pub owner can order more meat, bread, beer. You know, business is starting to recover. You see, we talked about vicious circles with things getting worse and worse. This is kind of the opposite. By stimulating economic activity, by making work, by getting people back to work, the government is therefore putting money into their pockets, and that stimulates their own economic activities. And again, triggering a cycle, kind of benevolent cycle, if you like. Demand management is the jargon here. Good. Let's find an illustration of this, maybe the most famous one. Actually, we've talked about this before, didn't we? I think it was in a similar question in one of my earlier slides. What happened in 1929? What do you remember about this period of history and the years following it? And I'll say some words about this photo shortly. Pause here, natter with your partner. Well, I'm guessing you remembered, we're talking here about the economic crisis that we had at the end of the 1920s. We talk about the Great Crash, I've already talked about Black Thursday just now. So what can we say about this period in history? Well, this economic crisis triggered a beastly economic recession, which in America, we created a new word for. It was the Depression, not a recession. It was the Great Depression. My photo is a photo I'm very fond of. As a social worker, maybe I'm really intrigued by images like this. It's actually a very, very sad photo. It's really quite heartbreaking. The photo is by a photographer called Dorothea Lange. Dorothea Lange travelled across America in the Great Depression, and she looked at the lives of everyday poor people. I think this was a pea picker. So this lady was picking peas, harvesting peas to earn a wage. And the photos Dorothea Lange took really are heartbreaking images. You're seeing that the human spirit always survives, but these people really are almost on the point of giving up. And it really is a moving portfolio of photos. If you're interested, there's a very interesting book out there, which this photo comes from, Let Us Now Praise Famous Men. Let Us Now Praise Famous Men. Real book tip there. Also, if you're interested in this period of American history, of course, there's an amazing American novel, perhaps the greatest American novel, John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath. There's also a lovely film on that story. So yeah, moving stuff, heartbreaking stuff. The Great Depression was a period of prolonged human misery, bringing to our attention the importance of the economy to everyday people's lives. So we were talking about Keynes's idea. He was saying, hey, public works, let's get people back to work. The government should finance building projects, get the workers working. The realization of Keynes's ideas came with President Roosevelt. Of course, he was the World War II president, again, a real American hero. He shared Keynes's economic instincts. I have no idea whether he had read Keynes's work or whether his advisors had. I don't know at all, but he had very, very similar instincts. His response to the Great Depression was to start the most adventurous series of government investment the world had ever seen. This really was spectacular. And I've got a nice illustration here. Pause here and natter with your partner. What is this a picture of? And how does it illustrate applying Keynes' ideas? Press pause. Did you work it out? What you're seeing here is really quite spectacular. We kind of like peer at the screen. We're seeing an enormous dam. We're seeing an enormous dam. It goes without saying, all that water that you're seeing there above the dam, that wasn't water, that was simply an empty valley with a little river at the bottom. This dam, of course, is blocking that valley. It's generating electricity, generating cheap and ecological electricity. And you can imagine the scale of this building project. This is large-scale human engineering. And it's an example of the public works we had in that particular period when Roosevelt got America back to work. I've got a lovely documentary on this. The picture quality is a bit rough. It's kind of like from a VHS video cassette, but it's very enjoyable, well worth watching. It's 10 minutes long. Check it out. President Roosevelt's New Deal, so a program of stimulating the economy to help it recover. Hope you like it. Interesting discussion point here. Could we use a New Deal Keynesian approach to rebuild our economies right now in 2020? Of course, my reason for recording this video, we're all sitting at home, learning at home because of a corona outbreak. We're waiting for it to end. It will end, but the economy is going to take a battering in the coming weeks and months. Could we use this Keynesian approach to stimulate our economy to get people back to work afterwards? There's a question to think about whilst you watch the New Deal documentary. Well, this is an interesting question. I'm not sure what your feelings are. Each economist would answer this question differently. I'm utterly convinced. I see the Keynesian approach to be very suited to after one of these crisis situations. And as I mentioned earlier, Keynes' theory really was applied by governments after World War II. And I think in a sense they're well suited to that environment when the population, the workers are just crying out for some stimulation of the economy. So we'll see what happens. Watch this space. I wouldn't be surprised if these ideas were applied in the coming months, in the coming year. My last question for this presentation, as you can see, I'm talking about this with passion. I'm a social worker, and Keynes is a hero of the political left, you know, left-wing social workers, sociologists, and so on. So maybe that explains my affection for his ideas. But the question is valid. Are we still following this economic theory? I've already said it really was the primary theory used in the post-war periods. what about now? What about today? Do we still practice Keynesian economics in countries like Britain, in countries like Germany? Press pause and natter with your partner. Any thoughts, any guesses? You might say, yeah, why not? Absolutely. If it worked then, it could work now. It is worth noting, though, economists are agreed that for some reason, this theory seemed to work much less well after the mid-1970s onwards. What on earth happened in the mid-1970s? We had a kind of political and economic crisis triggered by the oil crisis. So our industrial economies were very dependent on having cheap oil, and we had problems with the oil supply, problems with international relations, basically. And we had oil blockages. Companies couldn't get hold of oil, and it triggered a kind of economic crisis, which our states took a long time to recover from. And in that period, we had unemployment rising, and parallel to that, we had inflation. So a beastly combination, which many people in economics say you shouldn't really have. And from that time, governments used Keynesian approaches less and less. So although I'm passionate about this theory, I have to concede to some extent Keynesian economics went out of fashion from the 70s, the late 70s onwards. Good. What replaced it? Well, that's going to be the topic, isn't it, of our next video. If you want more information, obviously there's a whole bunch of reading out there on the internet. If you want to watch more TV, there's a lovely episode in the same series, the BBC series on money, which I recommended last time, of Karl Marx. There's also an edition of that series on Keynes, and you'll find it to watch from your favourite video host. There you are. Hope you enjoyed this video. Final video in this series coming up next.